Welcome back to From the Stands College Football Show. It is week 14. Joining me this week is Andy and Tom again. Andy, fan of the Illinois Illini. How's it going?
It's going well, man. Got our game canceled with Ohio State. Avoided that whole mess. As much as you hate to see games canceled, might have been a little bit of a blessing in disguise. Could have been a rough one for the Illini. Probably worse off for Ohio State, I guess we'll say this. I believe the day of the game or the day before, they had a total of like 15 or 16 positive tests. Ryan Day still not with the program, I believe. But as far as Illinois goes, man, we got a chance to finish the season above 500. So I'll take that for sure. Iowa this week, I don't really know what to expect. The Hawkeyes have, they won 26-20 over a Nebraska team last week that Illinois beat by 3 scores. So this will be an interesting week. But as far as how everything's going, I'm feeling good, man. Thanks for having me as always, Brian.
Yeah, of course. And yeah, it's basically a little bit of a win for the Illini there and a loss for Ohio State, like you said, by not playing that game. And we have Tom.
I mean, if we're going by Dabo Sweeney's logic, the Buckeyes are afraid to play us. So
There you go. And to my right, we have Tom, fan of the Notre Dame Fighting Irish here. How's it going, Tom? Riding high still in the top 4.
Yeah, Brian, thanks for having me again. Really appreciate it. Love coming on this show. Still riding high. That 28-point first quarter against North Carolina scared me a little bit. It was kind of a back and forth seesaw type of game, but we were able to come out victorious, improve, stay on the feet, and now senior day coming up against the Syracuse Orange. So that should be very interesting. And we clinched our spot in the ACC title game. So looking forward to that and getting another crack at those Clemson Tigers.
There you go. And we'll move in very quickly to our 13 recap. What games caught your eye or were interesting to you from the last week, Tom?
Well, last week, Iowa State and Texas definitely caught my eye because it was a difficult road game, and Iowa State was down in the fourth quarter, actually, and they ended up scoring 10 points. I think that helps them out a lot. Tough road win for them, improving to 7-2. I mean, I just really, just as a fan of like college football, just love watching come from behind wins. I thought Purdy had a solid game, and then I'm just gonna say it, Bryce Hall. I mean, I told you guys he's good on that last show. I know Najee Harris is great too, but it was 91 yards and a touchdown. He's been a good focal point of their offense. I think he's a very dynamic player. So I was happy. Probably that was my most fun game to watch of the week for sure.
Okay. What about you, Andy?
So yeah, I got 2 I'll mention here. The Notre Dame North Carolina game was very fun. Tom, you mentioned 28 points in the first quarter. I took the over, and of course it doesn't go over. It stays under after that incredibly fast start and all those points. Just ridiculous. But my game, Buffalo hangs 70 points on Kent State. I talked about Maction running backs on the last show, bringing it back. Jarrett Patterson, man, what a run he has been on this last week. Ties University of Illinois graduate Howard Griffith's record for rush TDs in a game with 8. He finishes the game 36 rushes, 409 yards, and 8 touchdowns. That is the second most rush yards ever in a single game in college football history, behind Samaje Perine at Oklahoma, who I believe ran for 427. But 36 rushes for 409 yards. Like, their quarterback, Van Treese, only had to throw the ball 21 times. He was 11 for 21 with 148 yards. And his team scored 70 points. That's absolutely insane. Coach should have kept Patterson out there on the field to score one more touchdown or break that yards record. But yeah, just hell of a game by Patterson. That's like video game numbers right there. That's throwing it back to NCAA football 14, and you're on road to glory and just tearing it up. So congratulations to you, Jarrett Patterson. That's my shout out. That's what stood out to me.
Yeah, for anyone who didn't see that game, I highly recommend at least going to check out the highlights because, 400 plus yards and 8 TDs. Like you said, those are video game statistics, and it was incredible to watch. I like watching him because his feet just move so quick, he's floating. He was like Fred Flintstone out there, with the little feet going really fast, but the body barely looking like it's moving. So yeah, check out the highlights seeing those. Back to the Iowa State-Texas game. Obviously a good win there for the Cyclones. My favorite part about the entire game actually was the post-game comments by Brees Hall saying about the win, it's 5-star culture versus 5-star players. That's just the perfect knock on the Texas program over, I guess, pretty much the entire last decade. And there's no comeback for it if you're a Longhorns fan. They bring in the 5-star players time and time again, and it just continues to not work. So that was a good win for them. And then Northwestern losing to a very, very bad Michigan State team. With Ohio State's problems with COVID and maybe not being able to make that Big Ten championship game, that's not a great scenario for the Big Ten to lose their only other real shot at a playoff spot. So, not good for Northwestern there. And we'll move into our next segment. Let me get the transition going. There we go. The transfer portal train. Your next stop is another school. The transfer portal has been pretty crucial this year. Obviously, it's specific circumstances with COVID. Rules have changed. But I want to get you guys' thoughts on the volume of players that we're seeing utilize this transfer portal this year. It's a bit weird because the NCAA has been historically very tight with the regulations, and this year it seems like a free-for-all. So what are we thinking on how the transfer portal has been going and how it might continue to go for these last few weeks, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of athletics these days. No matter what college you're at, if you're not the guy, there's a lot of times where you're going to go and find another situation. I don't know if you attribute that to the way kids are coming up in sports these days, being told by everybody that they're being put on a pedestal, and you just don't see very many guys that want to just be role players, and not always be in the limelight anymore. And I'm not trying to knock anybody. Go be in the best situation that is for you. That is what is important. That's why I do like this transfer portal. What they have done with the portal, it's something that the NCAA hasn't really done before. They're speeding up the process, making it not so hard for these guys to move all their information over to each school, make sure they're eligible, all of that kind of stuff. I do like the rule this year that they put in place that pretty much everybody that transferred is immediately eligible. I wouldn't mind seeing that just as the standard going forward, to be honest with you. I know this is like all these crazy times and these guys can just come back. This year's not really going to count towards their eligibility, but I mean, we've seen a lot of cases in the past, guys transferring to a new school to be, closer to family or back home. Let's say a sick relative, for example, like I'll bring up Illinois tight end Luke Ford, transferred back home from Georgia. I believe he's from Carterville or something like that around here. His grandfather, unfortunately, ended up passing away, but he transferred here to be closer to his grandfather so his family could see him play, puts in that hardship waiver, and he's denied because I believe there's some type of rule if your hometown is within 100 miles of your college campus, that you'll be able to play. You'll get your waiver. There isn't one single college campus, I believe, within 100 miles of this kid's hometown, where we see guys that are 10 miles out, 5 miles away that are getting denied. But God forbid, let's talk about a guy like Justin Fields. You talk about a guy like Tate Martell. If you're at a blue blood program, a blue blood quarterback, you can just go wherever you want, do whatever you want. I also think you have to say something about coaches. They can leave their contract whenever they want. There's no time for them sitting out. So I like the standard, make them immediately eligible. Obviously, this goes case by case. But I like what they've been doing so far. As far as the sheer number, I think you just attribute that to the weird times. There's new dudes showing up on these campuses every day that take your spot. I mean, these Power 5 football programs are no joke, especially places like Ohio State, places like Alabama, where it's just their walk-ons could go play anywhere in the country.
Yeah. What about you, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting if you look at it. JT Daniels is a guy, who transferred from USC to Georgia, and that's been working out for him now. He's getting some reps. And you look at the transfer portal currently, Florida running back Iverson Clement is in there. I heard former Alabama tight end is back in there too. Kendrick James is another guy. And a lot of the top players, like even you look in the NFL, like Randy Moss transferred twice. Remember, he started with Notre Dame. He went from Florida State to Marshall. So I think the volume of players is larger than normal years. You could dissect and say, oh, maybe the recruiting isn't going out as well, or some of these big name teams are just insanely recruiting, similar star guys every year. And I think in my opinion, it's good because there's competition for roles. And if a guy doesn't like their role, they're going to want to transfer. I think, you look at certain schools like Georgia, USC, Alabama, and there's 90 guys on a college football roster, guys. I mean, that's a lot of guys. So there's not always, you can't always feed everyone's mouth appropriately at every single school. So you're going to see this happen from time to time. Brian and Andy, I think it's more of a cycle, in my opinion. I think we're just going through a time that there's a lot of transfers. I don't think this is like the new norm or anything.
Okay. Yeah, I'm definitely for the portal. I mean, like you said, JT Daniels is a great example. These situations where someone basically learns. I mean, every player goes into it thinking, all right, I got recruited by this school. They want me as a starter. DeJuan Mathis goes to Georgia, same time as JT Daniels transfers over. Doesn't get this. Well, I mean, he started week 1 for a little bit, but it didn't go very well. And with these new rules and how easy they've made it this year, he now immediately can transfer and be eligible to go play, next year wherever he wants. I definitely think it's good for these players. Like you said, some people just don't mesh well with either a team or a city or just that college environment. These colleges are so different, so it's nice that they have the ability, to maybe go closer to home or closer to maybe their main group of friends from high school all went to the same college, and they can now transfer there, be with people they know, and maybe that makes them more comfortable on the football team. So, yeah, I'm definitely for it. Do you guys think what they have this season should be sort of permanently entrenched going forward for the transfer portal? How easy they've made it?
I mean, with how easy I do agree. Like, the guys shouldn't have to sit out a year as long as they're like an adequate academic standing and they're granted like proper permission from the university. But it has become very easy, as where I think you could make the argument: are some players taking advantage of it? Absolutely. I think that could be a question that's raised but that's going to happen regardless of how easy it is or how hard it is. I think some teams are going to push for it more than others. It's really tough to dissect. I mean, Kevin Harris out of Alabama is just another guy to talk about as well, similar to Mackenzie Milton. Not getting as much reps as he would like. So I don't necessarily think it's become like extremely easy, but it is easier than it has been in previous years, as where I do think it is becoming more common. Remember, guys, this portal, it's viewable to coaches from every other school. So it's not like they have the background and research on these guys. So I don't necessarily think that it's a bad thing that it's become this easy, but I definitely think it has to become monitored to the point where fans and schools aren't assuming that players are in fact taking advantage of this new transfer portal system. So, I'm kind of more in the middle ground here. Like, I'm for it, but it's kind of like, if this is just a cycle, I'm fine with it. But if it continues to be an ongoing trend, then I would jump the brakes a little bit, because, you just hate to see, guys bouncing around from team to team. That's just my opinion. But I like to see guys, when I'm getting recruited to a college, it's a place where you want to spend for 4 to 5 years, right? So you look at majority of the NCAA, majority of guys are 4 to 5 year players. And it doesn't necessarily matter where you start. It matters how you finish. I would just like to see the recruiting process be more angled to the point where athletes are, guaranteed to stay for the next 4 years, because there's just way too many moving parts if you have to bounce around from school to school.
Okay. And bouncing off of that, any rules or requirements, like Tom's kind of saying that you would want to maybe add going forward for the transfer portal, just to make sure, like Tom said, players aren't just bouncing from school to school year after year?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I like everything that Tom just said. I think they should be eligible immediately, depending on each case to case. Like I said, like academics is great. Make sure that they're available to play in the classroom, like they're eligible there and they're doing what they're supposed to do. There's no outstanding things that they may have done off the field that are bad as well. But yeah, as far as like rules go, I just want to see it more uniform. I want to see the little guys. I want to see the G5 conferences have just the same amount of shot as the big guys, the Power Fives. Like, as a fan of a team that has attacked this transfer portal heavily and gone with that grad transfer route, I've seen what it can do. The Illinois quarterback is a grad transfer, while almost all of our receivers are currently transferred in. Like, we're calling ourselves Transfer U now here. There's a lot of teams that if you're not necessarily one of those blue blood programs, you're going to miss out on those original 4 and 5 star guys. But those guys find out at those big programs that it's not always, they're not just going to come in and make an impact right away. So I think it's just a very good tool for the NCAA, but the athletes as well, to put themselves out there. Maybe before this, we saw guys that were talented enough to make it at other places where these coaches just wouldn't really know where to look or know anything about them. So, I mean, overall, I like it. As far as rules go, I just want to see it as an even playing field. I know that's not really a rule, but just make it uniform, make no unfair advantages, which I know in college athletics that's kind of hard to say, depending on what program you're following, the amount of boosters and moolah they have. But
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I do think it needs a little tightening up after this year, assuming it isn't a cycle and players are looking at this as hey, I can just bounce over to this school that's been hitting me up because I'm not liking my situation here. But the one specific rule that I think at least needs some looking at is the ability for players to leave if the coach that recruited them suddenly leaves their school. Because coaches, like you said, there's no eligibility rule for any head coach, assistant coach, whatever. So you can have someone come sit down with your family, have dinner with you at a high school as a recruit, and you're like, all right, this is my guy. I feel this program. This is the guy I want to play for. And then all of a sudden he gets offered a big, massive contract from a blue chip program. He's gone. You're stuck at the school, maybe with a head coach you don't like. That's the only thing that I think they at least need to make some sort of new rule on. If your coach leaves that recruited you, you should have the freedom to move on with instant eligibility, in my eyes. Are there any players specifically that you guys have kept an eye on that have entered the transfer portal? They're looking interesting. Start with Tom on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned his name before, but Iverson Clement from Florida, a running back who came in and was highly regarded as one of the top recruits of his class, and he's barely touched the ball his first couple of years. I believe this is his, third season that he's been there. So I think it's about time that he gets some more touches. And now I understand the SEC, it's very difficult to make a living there if the transition from high school to college can be drastic for some of these guys. So Iverson Clement, I think, is a name to keep an eye on from the running back position. I think he's one of the top guys. For me, it's between him and I was going to say Kevin Harris out of Alabama, but now, Brian, that your quarterback is in there, Mackenzie Milton. I hate to say it, but he's probably the other guy too. But Iverson Clement is definitely my guy for sure. I love his elusiveness. He's very quick, and whoever picks him up is going to have a gem, in my opinion. He's kind of that type of guy that doesn't play much the first couple of years, but the last couple of years, look out.
What about you, Andy? Anyone that caught your eye?
Yeah, so I also have a running back. So Florida State's Callum Layborn. So he was a redshirt junior, just like Thomas said with Clement, just hasn't really had an opportunity. But this is a former 5-star recruit. He was ranked the #1 all-purpose back out of high school, signed with Florida State in 2016, had offers from Bama, Miami, other blue blood programs. But yeah, he just really has not gotten his shot in Tallahassee. I believe he got there with Jimbo Fisher, was injured in his freshman season, only played about 2 games, causing him to, redshirt, miss that. 2018, he only appeared in 2 games. I'm sorry. So he redshirted when he got there, got hurt as a redshirt freshman. So really, he's listed as a redshirt junior, but there's not a lot of wear and tear on the guy. I guess, yeah, injuries, but he just really hasn't gotten his shot at Florida State. He started with Jimbo, went through Willie Taggart, now onto Mike Norvell, had enough of it. He's moving on. But I mean, if you look at his stats, like last season, he played in 10 games, 63 attempts for 297 yards and 4 touchdowns, 10 receptions out of the backfield for 63 yards or 66 yards. So there's talent there. When he did get an opportunity, he was able to make a few plays, but just really not the number of reps that he'd like to see. And I'm sure when he signed with Florida State as a top recruit, he was one of those thinking, I'm going to be playing for Jimbo Fisher for the next 4 years. When that program's trajectory was a little bit higher than it's come crashing down to now. Brian, I'm sure you know way more about that than either of us, with you being from Florida. But yeah, I'm going to keep an eye on Layborn here. I think anytime you see a former 5-star recruit in the transfer portal, that's definitely somebody to keep an eye on.
Yes, I certainly have been watching the painful downfall over the last few years of Florida State. It's very fun to watch as someone with friends who are Seminole fans. Yeah, my pick, Tom already touched on him a little bit, Mackenzie Milton. It's a sentimental pick. I think all UCF fans are sad to see him go. I was talking with you guys pre-show about this. You want to see him play somewhere. He was such a good player with us. Probably not elite quarterback skills, but definitely an elite athlete. Yeah, it's just one of those things where you're happy and sad at the same time, because you wanted him to get the reps, but Dillon Gabriel has been pretty good, and we got to be honest, he's got the better arm of the two. Going forward, Heupel kind of uses those long routes a lot better than Scott Frost did. Scott Frost was sort of an open field. All right, let's dump it off short. If it's not there, Mackenzie, use your feet, make it happen. Dillon Gabriel, bit more on the arm side there. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see where he goes. Somebody pointed out that he started a Twitter account, follows just 3 people, and they are all Ole Miss coaches, but they're all ex-UCF coaches, so might not really be something there. And I don't really see him getting the starting job over Matt Corral there. He's been doing pretty decent for the Rebels, so I'm not really sure he's making a move there. But I think back with Scott Frost as a sequel back in Nebraska might be interesting. But we'll see. Definitely a lot of time there for Milton to make his choice. But I'll definitely be watching that one. We're going to move on to the next segment. It is called Ruling on the Field. We're going to make some rulings on a few wild card things that are going on in college football right now that we can't really get a great read on. So we're going to make some hasty choices here. We'll start off with number 1, Texas A&M. What's your ruling? Are they a real threat to make the CFP playoff or no? Sitting at number 5, but they've already got that loss to Florida, who...
No, they beat Florida.
Sorry, yeah, they have the win against Florida, but likely will not make the SEC championship game because they lost to Alabama, who is looking to run pretty much that entire West division right now. What do you guys think? Is Texas A&M a real threat to make it probably in that 4 spot? Andy, we'll start with you on this one.
No. I know they're sitting at number 5, but I mean, you said it. They've already lost to Bama. They're not going to make the SEC championship game, barring something crazy happening. I mean, is LSU going to beat Alabama? I don't think so. I'm not sure who Bama has after that. But if you look at Texas A&M, they will very likely win out, I believe. So they have Auburn and they finish with Tennessee and LSU. Those are probably 2 wins right there, but I just don't see the committee putting them in over Florida. Well, Florida would have to win the SEC championship to get in, I would guess. But I just don't see they're not gonna make the SEC championship game because they're in that same division as Bama, no matter how good they are. But yeah, I know they're sitting at number 5. I do think they're a very good football team, but I just don't see them in the playoff this year.
Tom, is Texas A&M making it into the college football playoff this year?
No. They did run Florida off the field. They had 205 rushing yards in that game, and that was a good signature win for them. But being in the SEC West, and I'm just looking at their remaining schedule. Their 2 remaining games are Auburn and Tennessee. Right, both of those games should be wins, realistically speaking. But remember something: they were blown out by Alabama this year. 52-24. They really couldn't compete much in that game. Now, I like Kellen Mond. I think he's a good quarterback. And Isaiah Spiller's a nice piece for them as well, but it's not enough. They're not one of the 4 best teams in the country. I think, despite Florida losing to them, Florida has a better shot than Texas A&M, despite losing to them and being 1 spot down on them, because as you guys just said it, they're probably going to make the SEC championship game where they will play Alabama. They have the most opportunities sitting in front of them to jump in if they beat Alabama. So no for Texas A&M, maybe for Florida, but a lot of chips would have to fall into their lap.
Okay.
Right. I think there's just too many paths. There's just not a path for Texas A&M. There still is for Florida. I just think that's what it comes down to.
Okay. I'm going against the grain with this one. I think they're a tiny threat, just a tiny one, because of the initial ranking having them above Florida. The CFP committee knew going into that ranking that A, Texas A&M had beaten Florida, and B, unless Alabama loses, which was looking super unlikely, Texas A&M couldn't make it to the SEC championship game, barring something drastic like an LSU, pulling out a miracle win this weekend against Alabama. And the committee still put them at 5. Now, I think, like you said, Florida probably has the best shot by getting that win against Alabama. Obviously, that almost certainly puts them in. But I think the biggest team that's under threat here is Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
Unless the Big Ten changes the championship game to, sort of abide by Ohio State's, all the games that they've lost, which we'll talk about here in a second. Ohio State is at a threat, I think, from the committee if they have only, say, 5 games. They've got Ohio State is sitting at 4-0 with 2 games left, needs both games to happen just to be able to qualify. I think if they end the season, say they get 1 game in, they're 5-0, can't play in the Big Ten championship game. Is 5 games enough to justify? I mean, Ohio State's had some rough outings. They've had some good outings, but they've had some rough outings, and I think they're hanging on a thread at the number 4 spot. And if Florida loses very badly to Alabama, I mean, the only other team I can think of is you put Cincinnati in there, but is the committee going to do that? I don't know. So I think Texas A&M, they're a good program. They don't do anything special. Kellen Mond completion percentage is under 60%, which is not very good. But they're getting it done under Jimbo, and I think if the Ohio State situation is what I want to watch the most, because if they falter one more game, I think Texas A&M does have a decent shot at sneaking in there a little bit. Moving on to the next one, G5 success. As we've been watching through Cincinnati, BYU, all up there, pretty high in the rankings. Is it enough to force the CFP committee's hands and get us an 8-team playoff in the near future, Andy?
You got 3 Power 5 teams that are 3 G5 teams, I should say, that are undefeated right now. 2 of them playing this week, Cincinnati, and then, of course, BYU and Coastal. I mean, why not? Like, if this is the year out of any to just see what we got with 8 teams. You just talked about it. Ohio State potentially it could have five games at the end of the regular season with so much uncertainty, games canceled. None of these teams, or I shouldn't say none, but the majority of these teams are not playing the same amount of games. So how much weight are we supposed to put into that? I would love to see what Cincinnati or BYU could do against these teams. Coastal, I think, is a good program as well, but I just don't see them stacking up as well as BYU and Cincinnati could potentially. But I mean, you never know. I'm really curious to see this BYU Coastal matchup this Saturday. I think that'll go a long way in kind of determining what the committee thinks about these G5, or like it'll tell us what they really think about these G5 teams. Like we've seen BYU started at 14 and they got up one spot to 13. There's an undefeated team. I know their strength of schedule comes into question. I guess Boise State's their best win. They haven't really played anybody. They were trying to play Washington. The Pac-12 nixed that in favor of Utah, which I get it. But I don't know. I'd love to see an 8-team playoff, and I think the way this year has gone, why not? I think this is the perfect year to do it. And I know it's not going to happen, but hopefully going forward, the committee kind of sees I don't want to say the power of the G5 teams, but they've held their own.
Power 6, baby.
Yeah.
What about you, Tom? Are we getting an 8-team playoff in the near future, or probably not?
Not in the significant future at all. I mean, we remember what Bill Hancock said. This was the guy. I mean, this is the college football playoff director. He's only committed to 4 teams for the significant future. I mean, you heard it from him. Can this change? Yeah, not this year. I mean, things change like a dime in sports, but no, not for the significant future. I mean, it is a shame. You have the American, the MAC, the Sun Belt. Eventually, it's going to happen, guys. I do think eventually it will happen. There's top 10 teams in the past that have been undefeated and have not made it. And also, not to mention, you now have representatives on the selection committee from the Sun Belt and the Mountain West, right? So you have committee members from each of those conferences. I mean, you look at Cincinnati's ranked at number 7. And the thing is, an 8-team college football playoff, guys, would ensure that all 5 power conferences get their champion along with the highest G5 champion, right? And then the remaining 2 spots are at large, which could go to, a team like a Florida or, or a Texas A&M. So I think it's going to be very, very interesting. It's not going to happen for at least another 5 to 7 years, in my opinion. I think we're going to be waiting a long time.
Doesn't that have to do with the TV deal as well?
Correct. It's kind of like Notre Dame's contract with NBC. You won't see them in the ACC next year.
Right. Yeah. So I think whenever they figure out that TV stuff, because there's a lot of money wrapped up in this college football playoff, guys. And you put it great though, Tom. And I do want to jump back just for a second. Cincinnati is going to play in the American Championship game, and that'll be against a ranked team in Tulsa, I believe. The committee's got to look at, let's say they win it and they win out. You'd put a 1-loss Texas A&M team that didn't play in their conference championship game over an undefeated conference champion in Cincinnati. I just don't see that. I mean, but I shouldn't say I don't see that. I don't like that. I can see the SEC bias of the CFP committee still doing that, but I just give these guys a shot. Let's see what they have. I'm not saying that they're going to come in there and win, but I mean, Brian, you're a UCF guy. You're national champions from a few years ago. You played in that bowl game with Auburn and beat them. You played very well. These teams in the American Conference aren't just rollover teams. Sure, they're not the level of talent top to bottom as, let's say, the Big Ten or the SEC, but I would just love to see what they got, because they're going to come in with the chip on their shoulder and ready to play. And that's what college football is all about. Tom, you mentioned the comeback wins and the underdogs. That's why people watch this sport. But yeah, I'd love to see the 18 playoff, but Tom hit it on the nail. I think it's maybe a 5-year plan here.
Yeah, 5 years does sound about. I mean, I know nothing about the TV contracts. I mean, I know they exist. I don't know what the specifics are though.
Yeah.
But yeah, if they get that sorted out, I do think 5 years would be a good look. The one thing people try to harp on is, well, once you go to 8 teams, it starts to dilute the competition. You know, we might get years where that 7 and 8 seed isn't great. Since 2016. I looked at it as if they had done a top 8 playoff on only 3 occasions, 2 of which are Wisconsin, by the way. Only 3 teams out of those, what would it be, 32, I guess, of those 32 teams that would be in an 18 playoff, only 3 have had 3 losses. So it's still from 1 to 7, 1 to 8. You're still getting 10 and 2 teams. It's not like people are getting in there at 7 and 4, or something that's not a great look. It's 2 lost teams, or one of which might be a conference championship game. That conference championship loser might still be better, than some of these other teams that are getting a look because of a weaker conference win. Like let's say, obviously not going to get in this year, but the Big 12 not looking great this year. Would you put in, their conference championship or their conference champion just because they won it over, let's say, an SEC conference championship loser who is clearly better but doesn't have that conference championship win? That's always an interesting argument. Something the committee obviously doesn't like to talk about really when they'll call it they like the body of work, is what they like to say when asked about how they rank teams. But yeah, I think if we can get it in 5 years, I'd be pretty happy because 8 team is a pretty good spot, I think. And let's hope they don't try to go to 16 after that because let's not get too wild.
Well, I mean, the FCS though, they have that big playoff and it works. I mean, my Redbirds, when I was a freshman at Illinois State, they went all the way to the championship game against fucking North Dakota State. Would have won if our DB didn't trip, but it's okay. But no, I mean, the FCS tournament has all those teams, and it's obviously not the same level of football, but it's still fun, and they keep the intrigue going. And I don't want to say you don't see upsets because that's not true, but I mean, North Dakota State's won 10 in a row or however many, or they're just always there. So I still think those high level teams would break through, but those matchups would just be way more interesting in my opinion. There'd just be so much more. I don't want to just randomness, like anything else could happen. I guess more so with the 8th and the 4, but
right, bringing that a little bit of the March Madness vibe. Yeah, the only reason I wouldn't be a fan of 16 is because scheduling wise, I don't see how you can play more than 8 games in the regular season, and then because you have to add those 4 rounds of playoffs. I think that'd be a little tough for the players. So I think 8 is a good agreement that the CFP committee should be able to come to, hopefully in the near future. Moving on to our third ruling on the field, the Big Ten is planning on potentially bending its own rules to keep Ohio State in the playoff hunt. Obviously, only sitting at 4-0 right now. They've had 2 games canceled already, 2 games left. If they lose one more at the current standing, they won't be able to make the Big Ten playoff. But they are considering changing that, surprise, surprise, to help Ohio State because they're in the hunt. What are you guys ruling on this? Is this a bit disingenuous by the Big Ten to suddenly change the rules here so late in the game just to help Ohio State? Or is it something that, every other conference probably would do? Tom, what do you think?
So I think this is interesting because you look at Ohio State and who they have left, right? So it's Michigan State on the road tomorrow, and then they host Michigan. And that would put them at 6. That would put them at 6-0 if they win both of those games. So, and then they would have the Big Ten championship. So that could potentially be a 7th game for them, right? With the 6-game minimum to qualify, I do think this helps out Ohio State a little bit. But guys, you have to remember something. The key is to ensure that the 4 best teams are in the college football playoff. If Ohio State, God forbid, has another game canceled and they're 5-0, you're going to get so much uproar from the Big Ten, from the fan base, and it's just not going to be a good look for college football. I know you mentioned a team like Cincinnati a minute ago that if Ohio State doesn't reach the 6 games, they could potentially be the next team if, Florida and Texas A&M just get beaten up, So I do think that this is fair to an extent because remember, you're also giving Ohio State opportunity to potentially slip up. I'm not saying they will. I don't think they will. But I would rather give them the opportunity to either get in or slip up than not give them an opportunity at all.
Okay, so you think, given their current form, say they win out these next 2 games, which they should,
Right.
The 6 games plus the conference championship, that would be enough for you to get them in? Sorry, if they lost and only had the 5 games, that would be enough to get them in still?
Okay,
Not
so
without a conference championship, I don't think.
No, I think if they only played 5 games, you would have to look down from there. I think Ohio State would get bumped, in my opinion. So I think that would carry heavy weight because, again, like I said, a team like Cincinnati, who's played more games, then it's you're going to get into the whole ethics thing with them. Like, why are we left out? We have more wins than them. You guys know what I'm saying? So it gets complicated from there.
All right, what about you, Andy?
Yeah, man, but dude, we really think the Big Ten wasn't gonna do this shit? Like, is this shocking anybody? They're really the Big Ten's only chance to make any noise in this national conversation. Big Ten fans are tired of hearing how good the SEC is. There's no way that Gene Smith, the AD at Ohio State, even Barry Alvarez over at Wisconsin is coming to their defense. I mean, everybody saw all the bullshit that Kevin Warren was spewing out of his mouth this offseason and all of that. Like, did we really think this wasn't going to happen? And I'm not trying to say like I'm opposed to it. I'd like to see the Big Ten in the college football playoff, but I want to make sure those 4 teams are deserving. And there is a really good chance that Michigan game gets canceled. I say that, but of course it's the game, so I doubt it will. But it's like I don't know, man. I what 5 wins, 5-0. No, they're toast. But 6-0, and you win that championship game. I guess we're assuming it'd be at first like Northwestern at this point. Yeah, I mean, I what Thomas said it perfectly. Really, my whole thing is I'm shocked. I'm shocked and in awe that the Big Ten would possibly bend their rules for the best team in the conference and to make more money. Of course.
Yeah, I mean, I really see any other conference, or at least P5 conference, doing similar, if not exactly the same.
Like the SEC would do the same thing for Alabama.
Right.
The Big 12 would do the same thing for, let's say, Oklahoma. The Pac-12, I don't know. They're kind of weirdos out there, but let's not act like the Big Ten is the only conference that would do this. But it's looking like Ohio State very well might need to do it. I do need to say why, like the whole canceling games for one program, like Illinois was down 14 total players earlier in the year and still played their first 3 games. Like they weren't like, I don't get it. Like, why does Ohio State getting special treatment over other programs? And I'm not just trying to say specifically mine, because there are other teams all across the country that have missed games. You talk about, I guess Wisconsin had a huge outbreak, but I don't know. I'm just not a fan of the Big Ten's rule that if a game gets canceled, they weren't looking to reschedule it against somebody else. Like, why wouldn't you want to keep your conference playing as many games as possible so this wouldn't be a problem for the Buckeyes potentially? Because I know their first game that got canceled was against Maryland, and that wasn't on them. That was a problem in the Terrapins locker room. And you see the Pac-12 is rescheduling games. They let UCLA and Cal play on a Sunday, and Washington and Utah got a game put together in a week. Like, the Big Ten doesn't need to act like this is something that's super hard to do here, but as far as Ohio State goes, man, that they need as many games as possible to get in, because it's going to be really hard for a 5-win team to be put in over a potential 10-win team. I'm not sure how many games every specific team is playing here, but
Yeah, I agree. I think every conference is doing the same thing in this scenario, but I'm still going to throw a flag on this
yeah,
play, because every conference going into this season had 6 months since the outbreak to come up with their rules, come up with their schedule, decide how everything was going to go. The Big Ten made their own bed. They told everyone how it was going to be, and teams start planning around that. If, like you said, it's not their fault they lost the Maryland game. Those COVID cases were on Maryland. There's nothing they can do about that. But every other team in the entire country has to deal with that same thing. Games getting canceled left and right. When you go and tell your entire conference, you got to play 6 games or you're not in the conference championship game, and then kids are still, irresponsible enough to go out. I mean, some might just
True.
be contact tracing and, not actual cases. I don't want to blame all the players, but when you're getting this
right.
many games canceled, it's, like I said, you made your own bed, and I would rather a team like a Cincinnati, or like I said, a Florida, Texas A&M, whoever comes out looking better of those two, I would rather one of them slide in than a team who's kind of been gifted it at 5-0, 6-0 if they win the conference championship game. Because 6 games, that's really just not enough for me. Like the second
Right.
Wisconsin lost their 3rd game, let's assume they do change it. The same rules would apply to Wisconsin here, who's sitting at 2-1. If by some miracle, I think via tiebreaker they could still get in. If by some miracle Wisconsin is in that at 4-1 and they beat Ohio State, I'm not putting them in.
Right.
They end up at 5-1. No, that's not good enough for me. Ohio State obviously has a little bit of edge over Wisconsin there because Wisconsin has the loss, but I don't know. The Big Ten is a shambles over how this has kind of gone down.
Not great, man. It's not
I do
been.
understand it. Like you said, from a money standpoint, they've they've kind of got to make this move, so their hand was forced. But we'll see. Hopefully they just get those last 2 games in, and it's not even an argument for all of us out there who should get in. We're gonna move into now our games of the week, our shots and chasers. Starting off at noon, we have Texas A&M sitting at number 5 playing Auburn, who's been a bit of a mixed bag this year. The game is on ESPN. Who do you got in this one, Tom?
I have Texas A&M. Look, I like Bo Nix for Auburn, and what he's been able to do. I've seen improvement in him throughout the season, and they have a good duo of wide receivers, Seth Williams and Anthony Schwartz, both over 100 yards last week. I like them, and Tank Bigsby at the running back position is solid too. But we've brought up Kellen Mond before and what he's been able to do in addition to Isaiah Spiller. It's just going to be too much. I think Texas A&M is going to be able to run the football efficiently. They're not going to run away with it. Auburn's a tough football team that I think will compete. I don't see a blowout here, considering they're at home, but I do see Texas A&M with a win by a couple of possessions for sure.
Okay, Andy.
Yeah, I also like Texas A&M here. One thing to look at: Auburn's defense has just been bad. They've been soft. They don't have a pass rush, or really not great against the run either. Their 3rd down defense is terrible. An SEC worst, 54%. They're allowing a conversion on 54% of their 3rd downs, 60% or more in 5 of the 8 games that they've played. Texas A&M's offense isn't really high flying, but we're talking about a defense here in Auburn that gave up 445 yards to Tennessee. In comparison, they gave up 464 yards to Alabama. So those are 2 vastly different offenses there, and they're still giving up over 400 yards. And Texas A&M is 5th in the nation on 3rd down conversions. If they're able to chew the clock with their running game, what's their running back's name here? I apologize. Isaiah Spiller. He's had 100 plus yard games in the last 5, more than 90 yards in 4 of the last. The defense hasn't allowed more than 90 yards in 4 of the last 5 games against the run. So Texas A&M is trending up, Auburn's trending down, obviously, with that loss last week to Alabama. But I will say for Auburn, Bo Nix has picked it up. He's thrown for 220 plus in the last 4 games, I believe. It's also senior day for the Tigers. And, losing to Bama is not great, but a win over A&M here ruins their season, ruins their playoff chances, like we were talking about earlier. So I will take the Aggies here. I think they control the game on the ground, win that 3rd down battle. And I just don't think Auburn has enough on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I'm going with Texas A&M here as well. Like you said, the pass rush, not great, and I think that's probably plays into Kellen Mond's hand the best. He's not the best quarterback by a long shot, but he gets the job done. He's very, I don't know, we'll say balanced. It's Texas A&M. That's a good word for Texas A&M. They're very balanced. They're not super special, but they're getting the job done when they need to. And if he has time, his long ball, I can't remember. He had like all of the entire season. He's had like three passing touchdowns, I think, over 25 yards, which you would think is not going to get you to number 5 in the nation, but they are. So, and they're playing well. Bo Nix, I think, is probably the biggest problem, or will be the biggest problem for Texas A&M. He's such a wild card. I was watching the Iron Bowl. They were already down, I think, pretty large. In their end zone, I think the ball was probably spotted at the 2 before the play started. He drops back into the end zone. He's got 2 300-pound Alabama linemen rushing straight at him. Doesn't try to throw the ball, over a receiver, over the sideline. Spin moves his way out towards the right sideline, gets down the line, and I think he completed the pass for like 12 or something yards. Almost got crushed by 600 pounds of, 5-star athlete. It's when you get wild card players like that, anything can happen. And the fact that Texas A&M isn't a big play team, I think the score will be close. I think it's sitting around 6 points right now, which I would still probably take Texas A&M. But when the scores are trending that closely, all it takes is one weird play, from a Bo Nix, a spin move, touchdown. We saw Johnny Manziel do the same thing at Texas A&M against Alabama back in the day. So I think anything can happen here, but I would probably still ride with Texas A&M. They've been a very solid team. So I think they take this, and I'd take them with that 6.5 points as well. Moving into
look at Brian throwing the spreads out there. I will say Auburn, incredible names: Big Cat Bryant and Smoke Monday. Insane.
Smoke Monday is a classic one. He's definitely an all-teamer for best names in college football. Moving on to our chaser at noon, we have Oklahoma State taking on TCU. Oklahoma State, probably the best team in the Big 12 right now, I guess. Who do you think takes this one, Andy?
This is kind of curious. Oklahoma State comes in at 6-2, TCU 4-4. What I will say about TCU is if they can get their ground game going, this could be a problem for the Cowboys. So they had 247 rushing yards or more in 3 of the last 4 games. The Horned Frogs are 4-0 this season when they rush for 227 yards or more. If Oklahoma State can stop the run, I think they take this game pretty easily. But the Horned Frogs are also 0-4 when they run for less than 227 yards. So if they can't really find their offense on the ground, not going to be a lot going for them. On Oklahoma State side of the ball, we saw Chuba Hubbard out last week. But I mean, Desmond Jackson came in and you wouldn't even have noticed Hubbard was gone. 235 yards and 3 scores. You don't like what they did, giving up so many points to Texas Tech in a 50-44 win. But I mean, I think you have to take the Cowboys here. They're the better team coming in. If they can limit TCU's running game, they roll.
All right, Tom, who you got on this one?
So when I look at TCU, the first thing I see is that they rely on their ground game, as Andy was alluding to just a moment ago. And it all starts with Max Duggan, the quarterback. 8 touchdowns through the air and 7 on the ground. So through 8 games, those aren't bad stats at all. If you contain him, you win this game. And when I look at the Cowboys, the reason why I didn't pick them against Oklahoma is because I thought Oklahoma I think they just matched up better against them. In this game, the Cowboys are clearly the better football team. You look at some of their defensive studs like Tyler Lacey and Calvin Bundage, who each have 4+ sacks. It's going to be very, very difficult for TCU to thread the needle in this game and be able to break down that defense for all 4 quarters. It's going to take magical plays for TCU to win this game. Gary Patterson's going to have his guys prepared, but Oklahoma State's winning this game, guys.
Yeah, I agree. You guys pretty much touched on everything important here for this game. If you contain Duggan, I think this is probably an easy win for Oklahoma State.
Yeah.
Spencer Sanders not doing too well at the quarterback for Oklahoma State, but I think Chuba Hubbard and Talon Wallace are good enough to compensate for that. And TCU, if like you said, the ground game is their key to pretty much any victory. You said they're 0-4 under 200 yards rushing this year.
When they rush for less than 227 yards, they're 0-4. When they rush for more than 270 yards, they're 4-0.
Okay,
it's a
well,
tall order.
So, but
tall
I mean,
order.
Oklahoma State's run defense is really good, and I believe in 3 of the last 4 games they've allowed 80 or less rush yards. So this is a big game for the Horned Frogs here. Obviously, they put the beat down on Kansas last weekend, 59-23. But I mean, that's a Kansas team that hasn't won a game yet, and is the joke of Power 5 football.
Yeah, so we might just see an entire ground game here. Spencer Sanders, 6 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. Not a superior ratio for a quarterback. So Hubbard versus Duggan. Whoever gets probably the most freedom, I guess, from those rush defenses probably takes the game. But I think Oklahoma State here, 2-point spread, seems like an easy cover, guys. Yeah, for Oklahoma State.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Moving into 3:30, we have our Big Ten, probably biggest matchup for them of the week, Indiana versus Wisconsin, both ranked. But Wisconsin only at 2-1, only played 3 games so far. Indiana got that loss to Ohio State. Who do you guys like in this one? Start with Tom. Oh, did we lose Tom?
So
Oh, there he is.
I believe Indiana just lost Penix Jr. Oh, okay.
Yep.
Sorry, a little lag there. But I believe Indiana just lost Penix Jr., correct? So that's a huge blow to them. And now you're going on the road to face a Wisconsin team that has, a really good quarterback in Graham Mertz. And I like their running back duo in Jalen Berger and Nakia Watson. Now they split carries for them. And what they also have is a reliable tight end in Jake Ferguson, 4 touchdowns through 3 games. He's been their leading pass catcher. Now, for Indiana in this game, I know we like to talk about those guys, Ty Freifogel and Wap Filler. I think those are 2 guys you have to keep an eye on. But for Indiana, I think they're going to rely on Stevie Scott. I mean, he has 8 rushing touchdowns this year. I don't know how much success they're going to have in the passing game because Wisconsin has a stout defense. Jack Sanborn, their linebacker, who's from Illinois, Andy, by the way, and then their safety, Eric Burrell. Those are good players for Wisconsin defensively. Very smart minds on the defensive side of the ball. It's going to be very difficult for Indiana to win this game despite their weapons in Stevie, Ty, and Wap. So Wisconsin favored by 14. That could be a little bit of a stretch, even without Penix Jr., but I'm definitely taking the Badgers to win this game.
All right, Andy.
Yeah, man, this is interesting to me, actually. So you mentioned Penix Jr., enter Seth Tuttle, former star recruit for Utah. I believe he played a little bit there, but kind of got his job taken. So he's used to playing. He's got a big arm, can sling the ball around the field. We'll be interested to see if he'll be able to find Freifogel and Filer because Wisconsin's secondary has not faced elite receivers yet. They have not faced an elite passing attack yet. They played very well against Northwestern. But besides a couple plays, obviously the 17-7 score there was more to do with the amount of turnovers that Wisconsin had. Can they take care of the ball against this, excuse me, against this Indiana defense? I do like what you said about Stevie Scott, 234 yards against Maryland last week. But the Wisconsin defense has only allowed 202 rushing yards and no touchdowns in 3 games. Obviously not a huge sample size, but that's pretty impressive through only 3 games of the year. And they're also, Wisconsin Badgers are number 1 in possession time and at third down conversions. So if they can, run the ball, control the tempo, control the clock, and rely on their defense to make stops and force Tuttle into some mistakes, I like the Badgers here. But I think this will be an interesting game. I'll be interested to see if Seth Tuttle will be able to find Freifogel and Watt Filer as much as Michael Penix Jr. was able to. But yeah, I think this will be a good one. I'm going to go with the Badgers.
Okay. Yeah. Penix Jr., losing him is obviously massive for Indiana and the Hoosiers here. I think their defense is probably going to be put on a pedestal here to kind of save the game. Tuttle, he went 5 for 5. That's not enough.
And when he came,
go ahead.
When he came in, though, they were already blowing out Maryland, so he didn't really have to throw the ball.
Right.
He was kind of just handing it off to Scott anyways. Sorry to cut you off.
No, you're good. Yeah, 5 throws, probably not getting, many reps in practice because Penix Jr. was, the guy, clearly, for them since the start of the season. But on the other hand, you have Mertz, who was also the obvious starter, but they've only played 3 games, one of which they lost and got held, to a pretty substantially mediocre offensive production in the Northwestern game. Northwestern did look like the better team there anyways, but I don't know if Tuttle's going to have the experience under the belt to kind of pull them out here with those, I'll call them elite receivers that they have there at Indiana. They've been doing very well this season. But I think, like you said, Stevie Scott is probably going to have to pull a lot of weight here to make up for the loss of Penix Jr. But I don't see it happening. I'm taking Wisconsin, but the plus 14 with the low scores that Wisconsin's kind of been running, I kind of like that for Indiana. But if we're talking straight up here, I do think Wisconsin gets the win. And then moving into our chaser for the 3:30 time slot, we have Buffalo at Ohio. If you're wondering why this game is on here, like we talked about earlier, Jarrett Patterson, a must-watch player right now, 8 touchdowns. Last week, he has 16 on the season. Buffalo's only played 4 games, averaging 4 touchdowns per game. So I think this will be a good game to watch if you're not a fan of the Big Ten. What do you like about this one, Andy, and who do you got?
You got to go Buffalo here, man. They're 4-0. They're the best team in the MAC by far. Patterson, 301 yards 2 weeks ago, 409 yards last week. He has just under 1,000 yards in 4 games. Absolutely incredible. Take the over, whatever it is. I don't have the line here, but this will be a fun Maction game, as if they aren't all pretty fun, but expect some crazy stuff to happen. Ohio's not great, but they're not anything to scoff at, especially in the MAC. I think this will be a good game. Look for a lot of points. Obviously, the story here will be how many yards does Patterson run for. If you're Ohio, that has to be their number one game plan is shore up the run and fill up those lanes. So we'll see. But the MAC East is on the line in this game. So this will be the first time that Buffalo clinches since 2018 if they are able to get the victory. But I'm going to go with Buffalo. It's hard not to pick a team with a running back that ran for 409 yards and 8 touchdowns last week and put up 70 points.
Yeah, but Buffalo does seem like the pick here. Like you said, still something to play for that MAC East. In Ohio, they're only 2-1. They do have the conference loss. Buffalo does not.
Hey guys, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but the game was actually canceled 23 minutes ago
Oh my
Oh,
due to
really?
COVID-19. Yeah, I'm just reading this now. The MAC East matchup becomes the second cancellation this week and the third cancellation overall in the MAC. This eye-popping Week 4 performance is not going to happen. So there's also a possibility that the Bobcats season is over. Kent State, the opponent on December 12th, also postponed its game this weekend. So Buffalo was literally on the buses to Ohio this afternoon when they found out the game was canceled. So
Wow. Okay, well, there goes our
yeah,
preview.
I
Thank you.
just what happened was I just went up to look up the spread for you, and I just I had a whole nice thing ready about Van Treese, and yeah, this is
Yeah,
news to us, but that's crazy.
that might be our first COVID mid-show cancellation.
I think
So,
so.
And the contact traces are Ohio related. I think Buffalo is fine. It's Ohio that's dealing with the COVID.
so basically, they just didn't want that Jarrett Patterson smoke, is what you're saying.
Pretty much,
He was
yeah. I mean,
that's unfortunate. He was 228 yards away from breaking Barry Sanders' all-time record for yards in a 3-game span. So,
yeah,
But that'll probably still stand, right? If the game is listed as canceled, that'll probably carry over to the next game.
yeah, so
I believe so. Yeah,
it should. Yeah, it should. It should.
You just wanted to see it this week.
Yeah, dude.
All right, let's make a very quick. We'll make a quick call here. Switch this out for Florida, Tennessee as the chaser. Probably not much research done as we're changing the fly, but I think we're probably all going to pick Florida here. Do we think how big of a blowout? I guess do we think it's going to be?
Florida's favored by 17 points. I hammered it on my podcast picks. Go Gators. Kyle Trask is the best quarterback in the country this year. You can book that. Like 34 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Kyle Pitts is an absolute monster at the tight end position. Literally can get whatever he wants as a tight end up the middle of the field. And then Jarrett Guantanamo for Tennessee has been awful this year. I think in his last 3 games, he's got 3 pick sixes and 2 touchdown passes.
Yep.
So just not great for the Volunteers. I like the Gators to roll here. I mean, they're in that spot. They're a must win. Got to get as many wins under that belt as possible, get as much momentum as you can going into that conference championship game against Alabama. So yeah, I like Florida here. Way to pick another game on the fly there, Brian.
What about you, Tom? Is 17 looking good, or do you think they win by more? Or do you like Tennessee?
Tennessee's 2-5. They're not winning. I don't think they're covering either. Florida should win just fine, guys. I mean, I do like what Tennessee has in Havon Bennett and DeAndre Johnson, each with 4.5 sacks. They're doing a really good job rushing the passer. I mean, the Vols look. What's the quarterback's name? Jarrett Guarantano. Yeah,
I definitely said it wrong. So I don't know. It starts with a G.
I'm not sold on him. I mean, Florida's going to win this game big. I would be shocked if they didn't.
Yeah, I think 17.5. I mean, this is also have up as ESPN. I don't know how often they change this, so this may have written up to about 20. Because I think most people are gonna ride with Florida here. I might take this game up to like 25. Just sell points on this game.
Okay.
I would recommend selling very high on this game because you can get a really good payout in a game that I think is going to be an absolute blowout here. These two teams don't like each other. Usually when that happens and one is very good and one is very bad, they'll run up the score. So, I don't know. We'll see. I think 24-25 should be fairly easy for Florida here. Moving into our 7:30 game, or we'll call them evening games because the BYU Coastal Carolina game that we have here is our shot. Actually starts at 5:30, so it's a bit of an in-betweener. Obviously, BYU scheduling this game very last second. Coastal Carolina was supposed to play Liberty. Liberty had problems. I wanted to see Liberty Coastal Carolina, honestly. I don't know about you guys, but I think this is a nice fill-in here for a last-second game. Get it on the cards. BYU probably needed that other game against a ranked team for a little bit of a better look to get a better bowl game. So, what do you think? Start with Tom on this one. BYU under Zach Wilson. Coastal Carolina is a bit of a Cinderella darling here. Who do you like?
So BYU's favored by 10 on the road, which is a little surprising to me. I mean, both teams are 9-0, and look, I love Zach Wilson, guys. The 26 touchdown passes are not something to just take lightly, and I love what BYU has. Tyler Algier with the 11 touchdowns. Gunnar Romney has been nice for them, and Isaac Rex. I mean, you could rely on him in the red zone. He has 24 catches on the season, 8 touchdowns, and we didn't even talk about Dax Milne. 900 over 900 receiving yards. They are an explosive offense, but I think freshman quarterback Grayson McCall will be up to the call tomorrow night. No pun intended. The 20 touchdowns, and I love what Coastal does running the football. CJ Marable and Reese White. Isaiah Likely has 4 touchdowns this year. He'll likely score tomorrow night as well. And their defense, guys, Silas Kelly, CJ Brewer, Teron Jackson, and Jeff Gunther, all upperclassmen. 3 of them are seniors. Each have 4.5 sacks or more. Teron Jackson is my player to watch in this game with those 8.5 sacks. He has a good release off the line. And I have Coastal Carolina knocking off BYU. It'll be a very close game. I think it probably comes down to a field goal. It may go into overtime, but give me the upset here. Coastal Carolina riding that wave. Let's go.
That's an interesting call. I like it. Andy, what about you? You also see an upset here, or is BYU rolling?
Dude, I don't know, but I love Thomas for taking that pick. So it's just 2 explosive offenses, right? The thing I love about Grayson McCall is he's a freshman, 20 touchdowns. He's only thrown 1 interception. He also has 5 scores on the ground, proves that he is able to do it in multiple ways. CJ Marable has been great. You talk about 592 yards and 8 touchdowns, but I also want to talk about BYU for a minute. Zach Wilson has put himself in the conversation to be a first-round draft pick at the quarterback position. You know, I have his stats right here. 2,724 yards, 26 touchdowns. He's only got 2 interceptions himself. The thing about BYU is they haven't played anybody. Their best game was against Boise State, and they beat the crap out of them, 51-17. You do point out that Hank Bachmeier was out for the Broncos in that game, as well as I think their backup quarterback. So they were down to their 3rd and 4th string guys. But yeah, I love what BYU has been able to do here. Their defense has allowed fewer than 300 yards a game. Their place kicker, Jake Oldroyd, has hit all 10 of his field goal attempts. So they've just been doing everything right. In the trenches, they're winning the battles offensively and defensively. But if you look over at Coastal, like I said, McCall is playing great, but they have more of the resume, if that makes sense. You know, out of the Sun Belt, they went to Lawrence and beat Kansas. I know I talked about Kansas earlier saying they were the biggest joke in Power 5, but that technically is a Power 5 win on the road against a Big 12 team for the chance. They won at Louisiana, who's a ranked team that beat Iowa State. Appalachian State, that game was a big win for the Chanticleers to move them to 9-0. This is first game in the college football playoff era where 2 G5 teams enter at 9-0. So I'm going to go with the Cougars just because I think their offense is a little bit more high-powered, and I think they're the better team overall. I think this is more of a growing year for Coastal. I don't know. I think it's going to be an awesome game. I think it's going to be a shootout. But I'm going to take the Cougars. I like Zach Wilson a little bit more and his experience, you know, kind of needing to prove all he can to up that draft stock before it's all said and done.
I'm not entirely sure who to take here as well.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a toss-up.
I know, I mean, a couple weeks ago, I think it might have been this exact same trio. I brought up CJ Marable. I love him as a running back. They didn't really give him the carries that they had been the following 2 weeks after I obviously name-dropped him, making me look bad. But like you said, White and McCall have stepped up in that rushing game as well, and that's kind of their triple threat there on the ground. Mm-hmm. Will be able to outpace Zach Wilson. I don't know. I don't think so. God, this is such a hard call. I'll tell you, I would
Yeah.
bet on this game because there's so many unknowns, I guess. BYU obviously traveling very last second here across the country to South Carolina. They might be a little tired, but on the other hand, you got Coastal, who was planning to play Liberty with Malik Willis. Maybe a little similar to Zach Wilson, very good on his feet, but the game plan is still going to change. It's been 48 hours of prep for them, so I think it'll be an interesting one to watch. If I gun to my head, if I have to pick, I'm probably going BYU here. Like you said, Zach Wilson. If nothing else, if they've basically been told there's no shot at the CFP slot for them, even if they go undefeated, he still has something to prove for his draft stock. So he's probably going to try and light it up every single game until the end of the season here. And I think he probably wills them to victory, and what'll probably be a high-scoring game here. And then if you don't want to watch that game, you're more of a P5 watcher, we got Alabama taking on LSU at Tiger Stadium. That game is on CBS. In most years, this would be a massive matchup, but LSU is reeling a little bit from losing a lot of players from that national championship team last year. Andy, who do you like in this one? I feel like it might be an obvious answer.
Yeah, I picked them on my podcast. Alabama minus 29. Take it. I think they blow them out. You talk about the game last year where LSU was able to win. Absolutely awesome game. Talk about their running down the sideline, running up the Alabama recruits, telling them this isn't the place to go. Come to LSU. There's a lot of shade being thrown. These Alabama guys remember this. You talk about the guys that came back for Alabama, like Najee Harris, Dylan Moses on the other side of the ball, because they know how good this team could be, how much this means to the University of Alabama and to them itself. I mean, look at all the guys they have on offense. Talk about Mac Jones, Najee Harris, Devonta Smith. There's so many names. I could go on forever with more guys from Alabama that have been able to make an impact this year and just make big plays. I just don't see any way that LSU really stops them at all. Like, I think this is a game that everything has to go right for LSU. You talk about Terrence Marshall from the Tigers, just opted out. He was their number one threat at receiver. And then even before the season, Jamar Chase, who's going to be a first-round draft pick, they lost him due to opt-outs. And then Thomas and I were talking about it before we got on here. It's really hard to reload when you have that amount of guys get drafted and you lose that much at LSU. I really love Coach O. Go Tigers. He's awesome, absolutely electric, but I just don't think they have it this year. I think you kind of punt on this one if you're the Tigers. I think it's going to be Alabama's day on Saturday.
Yeah, I think this one could get very, very ugly. Like you said, losing Chase and, oh my God, his name just slipped my mind. Who just opted out?
Terrence Marshall
Yes.
or Terrace. I don't know if
Marshall,
it's
that's
Terrence or Terrace or something. Yeah.
Yeah, losing those are probably their two biggest weapons, or were at least. You never want to lose players of that caliber. I mean, probably both, at least one. Jamar Chase is a first-round draft pick. Marshall, I'm not so sure on. I would think second round maybe at worst. So when you lose weapons like that, it's never great. And then they have PJ Finley in a quarterback. I remember preseason, all those high school recruit guys. You know probably who I'm talking about. They watch all those players very closely. All those recruits like to talk up. They're kind of like the hipsters of college football. They're like, hey, watch out for this guy. This guy's gonna be really good. Talking up TJ Finley. He has not had a great start so far. Granted, he kind of got thrown into the mix here, but he's got 4 touchdowns and 5 interceptions so far. That's not what you want going into a game against Alabama, who is always so stout and powerful on both sides of the ball. Saban last week, not there in the Iron Bowl. They still absolutely whooped Auburn. He's back, and like you said, after the shit talking of last year, he doesn't forget, surely, and I don't think any of the players will forget. So I think they're going to be out for blood, and this one's going to get ugly pretty early. What do you say the line was? Around 23?
29.
20. Yeah, I
It
mean,
might be up to 29, might be up to 29 and a half, might be up to 30 by now, but I mean,
yeah,
it's hard not to pick the tide here. Mac Jones, I have his stats pulled up: 2,728 yards, 23 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. He's just taking care of the ball really well, finding his guys. Devontae Smith has 1,024 receiving yards on the year. They haven't. Every game they've beat everybody by at least 15 points. So this is at least a 2-3 score game. Come on.
yeah. I do think they try to run up the score here. 29, like you said, possibly 30 at this point. Maybe a little too high for my taste. We'll see where that line goes. Who do you like in this one, Tom?
I mean, the obvious choice, it's Alabama, but we didn't talk about Najee Harris yet. 17 touchdowns now, so the guy just continues to pad up the stats, and he's real fun to watch. Future NFL talent. I also think you have to credit their offensive line, what they've been able to do. A couple seniors and a grad student. Their left tackle, Alex Leatherwood, is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I really like watching him play. And Bama has great linebackers and a really good secondary that's led by Christian Harris. They have a lot of guys on that defense that are going to cause problems for TJ Finley, whoever it is at quarterback. I mean, it's been an experiment for them all year trying to replace Joe Burrow, So, yeah, I mean, not to mention, guys, Alabama scored about 40 points in every game this year. I think they scored 38 in the opener against Mizzou. And then after that, it's pretty much been 40 or more. So give me Bama, and I would prefer to see LSU win, but they're not. Not a chance.
Will you take them at 29 and a half?
Will I take them at 29 and a half? No, I will not take them at 29 and a half.
Okay. Well, that will wrap up our games of the week. Hope you guys enjoy those. Definitely suiting up to be some good ones there. If you want to, be sure to subscribe down below. Give us a like if you want. We will have links also for Andy and Tom's shows and podcasts that they do down in the description with our own. And again, thanks to Andy and Tom for joining us for Week 14. Enjoy the action, and we will see everyone next week.